So I'm Dr. Lisa Trevino Forehand. I am the Senior Director here of Students, Family, and Community Instruction. And I am so excited to bring a parent engagement series for our families. We've heard a lot about what our families wanted. We've heard about talking about the difference and looking at bullying basics. We hear a lot about, hey, we need behavior tips on dealing with our youngest students. We hear a lot about the current fentanyl crisis as well as the human trafficking crisis. So what we did is we really partnered with San Diego, our county office of our district attorney's office, thank you. They do such wonderful presentations for families. I've had them at my school sites before, and this is the first time that we're bringing them for parents district-wide. So we are really excited to bring this to you. Bullying basics is something that we really go over a lot with our families. Really educating the difference between what is a rude incident, what is an incident, versus what is true bullying. And that's something that we really educate our leaders on, educate our teachers on to look for, and as well as talk with our families about that. I have kids in school as well, and they've had rude incidents, they've had incidents, and one was actually a victim of bullying as well. And so it definitely is something that we take very seriously. Today, Monique Myers is going to give you a presentation. If you have a personal problem or issue, I will feel free to give you my card at the end, and I will contact you personally, okay? But for right now, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Monique Myers. If we can give her a really big hand. She is a prosecuting district attorney for San Diego. And I'm excited to present for us today. Thank you, Monique.
Thank you for having me. My name is Monique Myers. I am a community partnership prosecutor at the San Diego District Attorney's Office. I've been a prosecutor for about 9 years. Actually, I think my anniversary is like this week, so it's been 9 years. And my role at the DA's office is a little bit different. So my job is to go out in the community, learn about community issues, and then problem solve. So collaborate with the community to address underlying societal issues that are related to the criminal justice system. I've been asked to talk to you about bullying. So we're going to talk about that. She referenced other topics that I'm also going to be talking to you about. So get comfy. We're going to chat for a little bit, but I want you to ask your questions along the way because it'll be more interesting this way. This is my voice all the time, so it's going to be an hour of just this. Or you could also participate and it could be less painful. So I encourage you to also participate. If you don't understand something, please let me know. So I'm going to do a shout out right here to NetSmarts. This is a great resource for you. I don't get paid from them, I'm not associated with them, but there are programs through the NCMEC, which is the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. That website puts on something called NetSmarts, the whole series with lots of educational information on there for parents related to internet safety and the internet and how it's used for bullying and human trafficking. It has information for educators, for parents, for students, of all ages. So if you have high school kids, there's a whole section for them. If you've got kindergartners, there's a whole section for them. I'm going to give you a big overview of information that you should know, but if you're interested in really deep diving, this is what I would recommend. If you called me and asked me, this is what I would recommend to you. The slides, for the most part, are going to have some information, and I'm going to do a lot of talking. There are certain slides that have tips and things I really want you to know. Those slides have a lot of information on them. The reason for that is I knew you were going to get this printed, and so you don't have to be writing down 100 million different things. You can just add to it. So with that, what is bullying? So does anyone have a working, this is the participation aspect. Do you guys have like a working definition of what bullying might be? What do you think it is? Oh, I went to law school, they just call on you, so please don't make me do that. I have no shame in my game.
When publicly comfortable,
so if I just came up to you right now, which I'm obviously not going to do, but if I just came up to you right now and like punched you in the shoulder, bullying?
Oh yeah, that is bullying. That's part of bullying.
So let's talk about, the reason I'm starting off with the definition is I want to make sure we're all talking about the same thing for the rest of the program. So bullying has this basic definition. There's an intent to harm, something that wasn't covered, I don't know how to use this, Okay, so repeated acts. So if I come up to you and I punch you one time, that's a one-time deal, right? I'm not a nice person. But let's say I do this to you every Tuesday morning, and it's not friendly. And there's a power imbalance between the two of us, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. That's when you start elevating yourself into that bullying category. And so I want to make sure that this part, this repeated acts, is really important, because sometimes we throw around the word bullying, and it's really someone being not nice, or being annoying, or rude. And I'm using not nice, but you know what I mean, like real not nice. It's being recorded, so it's going to be not nice. Yeah.
At what point does the harm over outweigh the repeated acts? So, like, if it's very malicious, could it be considered bullying if it's like severely malicious without being repetitive?
No, I think that becomes that they're a not nice person thing. But it might sound like you're talking about something very, very specific. And so I suggest that you talk with the superintendent, because the way you just described that has a real specificity vibe to it. But for the most part, there is this repeated nature of it. And the reason bullying has that repeated nature of it, as opposed to an unpleasant incident, is because that repeated nature of it is what makes it so harmful, in a different way than a one-time deal. So let's talk about the intent to harm. That's pretty clear. Repeated acts is pretty clear. Let's talk about power imbalance. What do I mean by power imbalance? It can be a whole host of things. Power imbalance can be physical, social, academic, emotional, or based on religion or heritage. So there can be some cultural power imbalances that are going on. It might not be obvious to somebody else, but if you're in the in-crowd, that makes sense to you. So there's a power imbalance of some kind that's happening. They're not generally equals. There are three players in the world of bullying. And we often do not talk about the three players in the world of bullying. We often talk about the victim and the aggressor, right? Okay, so what we were talking about was bullying has those repeated acts and that power imbalance. So this slide, the reason it has a lot of information on it is because it has three types of situations that you might come across as a parent with your family that can be helpful to understand the difference between like roughhousing, real fighting, and then bullying. So what do we see with roughhousing? And there's a lot of slides, but usually they're friends, they get along. So there isn't the power imbalance that's going on there, right? They're equal, they're buddies. So there's a balance of power, and in roughhousing, usually it's out of fun. There isn't that intention to harm the other person, right? It's a joke. Overall, everyone views it as positive and not a big deal. Even if you don't like it, the people involved might view it as not a big deal. Now, real fighting between two people, they're primarily not friends, but it's not repeated. So it's not a repeated action. It's like a one-time thing. Like me going up to this gentleman and punching him is a one-time thing. The power is relatively equal between the two parties that are fighting. There is that intention to do harm, but again, it's the one-time thing. Now, bullying, they're not friends, and it's usually repeated behavior. There's an unequal balance of power between them, and it might be something that you don't understand. Like, they look like equal to me, but socially at school they're not. Or one person views themselves as not. There is that intention to do harm, and you can distinguish the impact it has on the aggressor and the victim. They feel the situation differently. It's not mutual combat like a fight. There are 4 types of bullying, and I'm going to spend most of my time talking about cyberbullying, which is one of the types. But the other types are physical, verbal, social, which I'll briefly talk about, and then cyberbullying. And the reason I'm going to talk about cyberbullying primarily is for a couple of reasons. One, it's tied to a bunch of how my office often gets involved, but we've seen a giant influx of that, especially during COVID, and so that's what we're going to talk about. That's what I was asked to talk about. So there are 3 major players in the world of bullying. We talk about the bully, we talk about the victim, but the bystander is also really important to talk about in the world of bullying. The person who is just there watching it happen is also impacted by watching bullying. They're also playing a role in the experience of the victim and of the bully themselves. By the victim, they will feel that the bystander is accepting this behavior is okay amongst the group. And the bully feels encouraged because if someone thought it was a big deal, maybe they would say something, but apparently they're not. So we're going to talk about the impact it has on all 3 of these players in the world of bullying. But I want to highlight the bystander because oftentimes it feels like, well, my kid isn't the bully and my kid isn't being bullied, so my kid's okay. but they are experiencing psychological effects by seeing it happening at their school or in the park or wherever it is that they go. So briefly, social bullying. That's the lying, rumors, basically not inviting people to the party kind of behavior. That's spreading gossip around school, that type of thing, is social bullying, creating the in-group and the out-group in a real practical sort of sense. So far, any questions or thoughts? Okay. So cyberbullying is basically just bullying plus technology. And so we're going to talk about how that, what are some examples of that? Common examples that you might see and some things you might not appreciate. So long slides, I get asked to repeat this. Sending me text messages, photoshopping pictures. You're seeing that a lot right now in the community. Creating fake profiles on social networking sites and then having followers and sites that are devoted to creating memes or making fun of individuals. Posting fight videos and then mocking people. Spreading rumors and gossip online. Embarrassing photos being taken of individuals and then spread through text message or social media. And then harassing messages on people's profiles and in their DMs, in their direct messages. So what's the difference between bullying and cyberbullying? These are the big differences between it, and it makes it much, much harder for the victim. There's a sense of power and anonymity for the bully because it's like a big man behind the screen sort of syndrome in the sense that they're protected by that distance. They're not actually looking at the person eye to eye, but they have that distance of the screen of the computer. It's more impactful for the victim because it's with them at all times. So I was bullied as a kid, and when I would go home on the weekend or at the end of the day, like, the bullying is over, right? That kid is not home with me, home is safe. But now kids with cyberbullying, they have it in their pocket because it's on their cell phone, it's on social media. There is no break. It happens all the time. It continues at night. It continues into the weekend. So there's that lack of supervision that's happening, and so people are more emboldened to be harsher in bullying virtually, and the victim feels even more powerless because it's with them all the time. Additionally, because it is virtual, people can see it and share it in a way that if it just happened person to person, it won't be replicated as much, right? If a thing happens, it wasn't videoed, it dies right there. If it was videoed, it can be spread amongst everyone, and we get to relive that experience over and over and over again, which causes a re-traumatization of the victim. But it also causes this emboldenment for the perpetrator because they get continued gratification of their actions every time it's spread. So the district attorney's office and bullying. There's currently no California law prohibiting bullying. So there it is. We often get involved with things after the fact, after something has happened, after it elevates to the next level. That's usually where the district attorney's office is involved. And sometimes it starts off with sexting. So sexting is very common. Sexting is taking naked photographs of yourself and sending it to another person. Incredibly common amongst youth today and growing in popularity, for lack of a better way of describing it. It's growing because it's viewed as harmless and not a big deal. And socially it's viewed as not a big deal. And they take yourself back to being a kid. The first person that you had a crush on, you like loved that person. Right? It was a really big feeling, lots of emotions. And they often form these relationships and feel there's a level of trust. Of course, my boyfriend would never share these photos with anyone because we love each other. And I mean, an adult would say, well, that's probably not going to last. They are shareable photos, but a youth does not feel that way. And so what happens is they send these photos amongst each other. Shockingly, the relationship might not go as planned. And then the information, the photographs might be disseminated amongst their friends afterwards. And then it gets spread around. And that can lead to bullying. That is also potentially criminal in nature because it's child pornography. So the youth who's creating the naked photos has produced child pornography. When they sent it to another person, they distributed child pornography. The person received it, they had child pornography. And then when they shared it with their friends or someone else, they distributed child pornography as well. So those are all felonies. Now, does a kid like process this information and think I should send these photos? No. But that's usually the world that we come into is after this has already happened. And so I'm bringing this up because it's important for you to understand just our role in the system. So let's go back to the bully, the victim, the bystander. What's going on? How can you identify that someone is the victim? Let's start there. So they might change their behavior to be cyberbullies, specifically not wanting to use electronics, not wanting to use their cell phone, not wanting to use their computer, not wanting to use their Xbox. And I'm bringing up video games because we often don't appreciate that is a form of social media because you are talking to a stranger or you're talking to another individual online. And so that would count as well for that purpose. So Roblox, for example, you are engaging with another person virtually, and so that's a social media site. They might act nervous when they get a text message, an email, or some other message on social media. They might not want to go to school, which might be a change for that child. They might have been okay with going to school, and they no longer want to go to school. Or they don't want to go to something. They don't want to go to their soccer practice. They don't want to go to this after-school activity. Some notable change in their behavior that looks like them withdrawing, looking inward more, and not wanting to participate in the activities that they were before normally participating in. So if you suspect that this is happening, you suspect that someone is a victim, what can you as a parent do? What do you guys think that you could do? What do you think that you could do beforehand? Like all of you in this room right now, I'm assuming none of you, like no one's the victim of bullying for the purposes of this conversation. What can you do today as a parent to help your child moving forward? So monitor them, check the devices, not allow them to have devices. You said check the devices. Have conversations with them about what?
About dangers, about what has to do.
So how many of you are super comfortable on the social media sites that your kids use? Or that you think your kids would be using?
Comfortable as in like
you know how it works.
Yeah.
Like you're like, I understand how to change the privacy settings, I understand how to see their friends and read them. Like I could use it if I wanted to on my own. I'm not, but I could. If the answer is like, yeah, I think so, that's great. If you're like, I don't even know what site that they're using or I'm not comfortable with it, I would implore you to spend like 10 minutes and just deep dive how to use it. And I know that you're incredibly busy and you don't have 10 minutes to spend on these things. The problem is that if we as adults don't understand how to use these pages, the reality is that kids don't either. They act like they do, but they don't. I teach a class on internet safety, and the things that they tell me about what they're doing, they don't understand how it works. They don't understand privacy settings. They don't understand how to engage with other people and be good digital citizens. And so it's important that you understand how those pages work so you can guide them through that. Talking to them beforehand about that and talking to them about what to do is really helpful. A lot of kids feel shame, like they don't want to tell you about it because it's embarrassing. And so if you start the conversation before it's a problem, then you can become that trusted person in their life where they feel comfortable talking to you when this is happening. A lot of kids, what we see, especially with the sexting, is they try to fix it on their own. They try to fix it by themselves. They are usually not successful in the fix. They often make things worse because they keep engaging with the bully, thinking that they can talk them out of it, convince them to stop, or something to that effect, and all it does is add fuel to the fire and continue the bullying. And so if they feel like they have an outlet, someone to turn to, you might be able to cut it off at the pass before it really has legs, and get them the help that they need earlier on. So what do you do? Now, my kid is being bullied, they came to me because we had this amazing presentation from this prosecutor who said I need to go home and talk to my kids, and so I did. And my kids turned to me and they said, I'm being cyberbullied. Here, I'm showing you. Here, I'm being cyberbullied. Now what do you do?
I took screenshots.
Okay. So documenting what happened. is how I would phrase it. We're creating evidence of what happened, right? Any other ideas?
I also heard Bob, the person that sent it, and then.
So prevent them from engaging further on this content, right? So you're crushing it, you're gonna give me a question. So our suggestion is to do just that. So first is to stop all communication. Like I was saying, the kids often try to make it stop on their own, and so that just leads to one. So the first thing that we suggest is to document it, taking photos of it, screenshots, downloading it, whatever you can do to document what's happening. Because you know it's gonna turn into a he said, she said conversation. Or she said, but you know what I mean? Party A versus party B. I said this, no, I didn't say this. And then all the evidence is deleted. And so you want to take photographs or video or whatever, download it, depending on the form, yes.
I have a question about this. So even if my child is not being bullied, let's say, not a bad situation, but because they said they were the ones starting and taking the pictures and everything, they could also be in trouble, right?
The reality is that we're not prosecuting the victim for creating child pornography and sending it to their boyfriend. So that's the reality. That is a crime, but they're the victim of what happened. So yeah, I appreciate your question, but that's the reality is that they're being exploited by somebody else.
Because knowing that is gonna
Yes.
how I
Yes, absolutely, yeah. No, it's more of just the context, because we don't view it that way. As an adult, you decide to take photos of yourself, that's legal, you can do that. But kids don't realize that you can't do that. And it's a very serious crime. But our office is not interested in prosecuting the child who was being exploited by somebody else to do that. So you said you document it and then you block them. Kudos. The next part is changing passwords, changing email addresses, and deleting the account if necessary. Why is that? Because the harassment is going to continue. Sometimes what happens, you have blocked, let's call him Bobby. You block Bobby. That's his username. So what Bobby does is he creates Bobby2 and then restarts the conversation. And then you block Bobby2. And then he creates Bobby3 and 4 and 5. And so if it's that kind of thing, the best move is actually to start fresh. Create a new account. Some kids really have issues with that because they work really hard on creating their followers and they have a presence. And that's a route you need to figure out with them of what's the best move. But sometimes deleting that account and starting over is the move, depending on what's happening. And then you can report the abuse actually to the website itself. So TikTok, Snapchat, Facebook, etc. They all have mechanisms for reporting abuse and harassment on their sites. So that's a good avenue to go forward because they might be doing that to other people as well. That profile might be harassing other people also. Yes?
How about talking to bullies with their parents?
I mean, that's a very your choice on how to go forward with that, obviously, but you can see how that could potentially make things worse for the child. Because that could be fodder for further embarrassment of how it goes down, and it might be best to involve the school. And you're going to hear from the superintendent about your school's policy on bullying specifically. But I personally, I mean, that's a personal decision, but personally, I would tread very lightly with that because if that child is bullied, something might be going on that's causing this, but also the reality is that that mediation might not go as planned and could actually backfire. So it might be more helpful to have that type of, I'm calling it mediation, but to have that type of mediation with the school present because they actually have teeth in some way and might get the parents' cooperation in that way. So it could help, but you might actually want a third-party neutral person to help with that conversation. Because parents don't like to be told that their kid is the bully, and Mama Bear might come out, Papa Bear, and that might not actually be as effective of a conversation as you think it would. So I just put that in your mind to consider. A lot of people are unsure if they should notify school personnel or not. And the question usually becomes like, where did the incident happen? Was it on campus or off campus? I'm gonna let your superintendent talk to you guys about your school policy, but there's no harm in talking to the school about it, if it's on campus or not on campus. A lot of what happens off campus trickles on campus and works their way on campus just by the nature of them being kids and always texting and always posting and always doing things all the time. And then obviously call the police if there's new photographs, because we talked about that extensively, we understand why, or if there's any threats or fears for someone's safety. The police can intervene at that point as well and access, download, document all of those things and provide resources that are different than what your school provides. At this point, I'm gonna let your superintendent, she could.
I'm not the superintendent, but I'm with you.
Oh, sorry.
Again, the Senior Director of Student, Family, Community, and Instruction. And a couple of points, thank you so much for explaining some of those differences. Going to the cyberbullying, I think and especially with the sexting sometimes, I think that we sometimes think, oh, my kid's in elementary school and they're too young for that. And I can tell you that we really see a lot of that behavior in 5th and 6th grade. And so just really starting to think like, okay, monitoring what they're doing. I have Verizon. We have the Family Smart app that goes with Verizon. And it tells me every time she views something objectionable. It tells me, if she's receiving a call or texting late at night. I can set the hours, so I have the phone shut off at certain times. So just things like that. The apps change constantly. And so it's hard to keep on top of the different apps and what they can do. I even know they have like calculator apps and clock apps that look very innocent, but then you open them up and they do totally different things. And that is their sort to create that sense of secrecy. So thank you for that. And that's just a couple of different ways to think about monitoring what's going on through social media. A couple things about our bullying policy. If you go on our website, our bullying policy is under it's board policy 5131.2. And it really discusses exactly what Monique was talking about. Talking about that bullying means any severe or pervasive physical or verbal act or conduct. And that includes cyber, includes social media, includes physical, and so that's what that includes. So the policy is 6 pages, it is in more detail, but really that's what we do. We do also have an online uniform complaint that you can fill out if you ever feel that you need to do that. Our first step is always to go to the principal. And when you call here for the district office, you will get me, and the first thing I'll ask you is, have you talked with the principal? Because that is the first step. That is the first step, is talking with the principal, meeting with them, and resolving your concerns there first. And then if that doesn't work out, then we can go ahead and get involved and do that mediation between the principal and yourself. So that is the first step, but there also is a formal form that you can fill out online where the documents, and again, what happens is we take that form and we give it to the principal and we start there. Any questions?
So for the online form, you can only do that after you've reported it to the principal. You shouldn't do it also just have a
You can absolutely do it. Absolutely. Yeah, you can do it anytime, but what we do with that form is the principal directly uses that form. So the form doesn't necessarily go, it goes to us, but then we direct it to the principal to follow up first. Absolutely. And sometimes that's best if you want that documentation, trail, okay, you've done X, Y, and Z, and absolutely.
We had an incident happen during fall break, and it was the attacks to cyber, and I had emailed the principal, and she said that because it wasn't past school, but there was also physical stuff at school.
If it carries over to school, then we can. So that's when it becomes tricky if it's on a weekend or on a break. But if whatever happened carried over to school and affected school, then you can. That's a good question though. Because oftentimes it's happening at night or on the weekends, right?
But at that point, after the last incident, how is my son suspended from school when he's defending?
Right.
I just don't see, there's no, and it seems like no matter what the information, the answer is the same. Shouldn't have defended.
Right.
And at that point, it's like, what, it's been months and months of this, so
Right.
how is he fixing that? He's really not how my family. And my son has autism, so go figure. You know, it's already difficult enough for him
Right.
to handle those situations. How does the district support us in that sense? Because to this day, I can have no clear answer.
I don't, without knowing your specific situation, I don't want to get into it in front of everybody. I'll give you my card so that we can have that conversation. I also want to know more about the situation in your school site.
I have a question kind of along the lines, it's like, stuff happens, but it's downplayed at the school as accident. When you know that it's intentional, because it's always the same kid doing something to the same person, right? They're out on the soccer field, and your kid got accidentally tripped. Well, my kid, for example, he plays soccer, so he knows what foul is. He says the kid fouled him intentionally. Put his leg through my knee, and he says, "Oh, I slipped and tripped." That's kind of what my question was. Like, at what point does the severity of the intent to harm outweigh the repetitiveness? Because it might have been just like a prick or a little elbow bump or a little, like, something that gets played off as, oh, it's just he didn't know how hard he was hitting. So, I mean.
So only a situation like that it would be an incident. But if it was with that same student had the incidents over and over and over, then that becomes pervasive and that is different.
And they were in the same class and they weren't removed, and the teacher and the principal were wearing it, still were in the same class.
Yeah.
Until my son was repeatedly just assaulted on the playground, just got punched in the chest for absolutely no reason. So I think for the district, I know that not every situation is the same, but it seems like a lot of the signs are downplayed. Almost to the point where if it's too much work, we're just gonna they're gonna reflect on it, we're gonna talk to the counselor and that's it. But I know everyone's gonna say their kid's not gonna lie and all this. I mean that's understandable, but at some point, like, it needs, I think either the administrative needs to be coached into investigating, diving deeper, or getting more eyes on those situations, because I have 4 kids, 2 have gone through Chula Vista, and it's happened to all of them, and it's always the same way. It's always something very small that the teachers or the administrative just say, oh, well, they're having a bad day, or this was that, and it just gets downplayed, and it just, I personally feel that certain administrative handle it better, but it's a lot of the times I feel like it's just swept under because they feel, well, I'm only here from this time to this time, and I have to get my other stuff done. It's kind of the ones that like kind of try to push it under the rug is kind of what it seems like. I mean, my oldest he's going to be 16, and he's been in Chula Vista since he was in first grade, so it's like we've seen a lot of principals, a lot of administrators and stuff, and it's just sometimes it just seems like it's.
So I can say that we really have, and there's different viewpoints on this, but we really have shifted our focus as a district for the past 5 years to be really more restorative. We put a lot of effort into restorative practices with our teachers, with our classified staff, with our leaders, which means really to repair harm. It's really to restore the relationship. And so we are moving away, the county is moving away from, and our district's moving away from real punitive punishments. Even though if there's extremes, yes, we have consequences, but more about restorative, where you still have accountability, but you're also repairing the relationship to try to make it right. And so that is really, so I know sometimes that feels like, oh, we're not taking certain things as seriously, but it's really a shift in philosophy as to how do you make something right when you've wronged them.
How effective is that though? I mean, not to be rude, but it's like, so in my head, what you're saying about restoring that relationship, so it's like, let's say my kid's in 7th grade and they're, getting bullied constantly, and you guys are like trying to do that. It's like, oh, we're trying to restore that relationship. Are you talking about between like my kid and that kid?
No.
Okay.
And so no, it doesn't mean, it means repair the harm, but it doesn't necessarily mean, okay, you guys are friends. That's not what that means. It's just really more a shift in, we're moving away from everything's a punishment to trying to understand behavior, trying to get to the root causes of behavior, trying to also promote the social emotional learning for all students. And we've invested a lot of resources and money in, every school has a counselor, every school has social emotional learning support, every school has PBIS in place. So we're really trying to invest heavily on the social and emotional growth of our students. And that is a different lens. It's different.
But if the kid is still like, it sounds like in her situation, she kept trying to make the reports and whatever, and it kept happening, like, is there not like a 3-strike rule kind of a thing?
No, there's not.
Like,
There's not.
This is for.
Not for elementary
But there
schools.
should be some documentation.
Yes.
I mean, I think restorative practice is fantastic.
Right.
But you have to document because you won't be able to see the patterns. If you can't corroborate someone's story, God forbid there's a change in administration. in
Right,
school,
right.
And things get lost. So
we do have a documentation
that's
system.
what happens.
So the administrators should always be responding to you. They should be meeting with you. That's part of their job, and that's part of their role. And so if they aren't responding to you, that is when you call up here, and then that's when we get involved, when we say, no, you have to have that meeting. So that's number one. Number two, I do know that, and this frustrates parents, that we can't share information with you about the other student or consequences or what's going on with that. I will say again, we serve all students. So we are a public school district. We serve all students with a variety of needs, and some have more needs than others. And so that I know is frustrating because we can't share the behind the scenes of everything happening with students at that school. But if you are not being met with, if you feel that you aren't having your needs addressed, and other parents feel like the administrator is not meeting with them, calling them back, or responding, that's an issue. And let me know. So yes, we are seeing an increased need. We are seeing increased aggression through our younger students, specifically, to be honest, because we had kids at home for 2 years. And we had busy parents, myself included. I was working constantly on a computer. My kids were left by themselves on their computer, and I was hoping they were doing their distance learning. I didn't know because I was working. And so I'm sure that a lot of our kids were in similar situations. So because kids weren't in social situations, because they were isolated from family members, because they weren't out doing things that they would normally have in their developmental years for socialization, we are seeing kids that are in schools in our youngest grades that are having more aggression. So what we have done as a district is we have hired a lot of registered behavior technicians that go out to sites with highest needs. They're training teachers to work with intense behavior, students that have intense behavior needs. They're training administrators as well. We're really trying to utilize that preventative measure that we're seeing because there is a need. So yes, we have hired, I think so far it's 18 registered behavior technicians, in addition to partnering with other behavior specialists to just come do like a wraparound service for our highest, for some of our schools that have highest needs in those grade levels. And that's a direct result of what we have been seeing and what we've been hearing from teachers and from principals and from parents, because there definitely is this magnified need. So we're hoping that within the next couple of years, as kids have been in school and in daycare and preschool, we're not seeing some of the glaring needs that we're seeing now. And lack of communication, lack of socialization. And because of that, when you have communication socialization issues is when you oftentimes turn to aggressive.
I was going to ask if the teachers have training to help recognize bullying situations. My son is autistic, and we would have to sort of look for cues, like, is he not liking going to school anymore? Is there any training or assistance?
I do know that our teachers that teach our special education classrooms get specific training around that. As far as our general education teachers, beyond our social and emotional learning, that's a part of that piece. We are looking for something more along the lines of a curriculum like that. That's something that we're looking into. So we do have it embedded into the social and emotional learning that we do, but not as specific. I do know that they all do have to use common sense media, so they do a lot around cyber bullying and being a good digital citizen online. Every teacher has to teach a lesson appropriate to their grade level. But as far as the non-cyber, then we need to look more into that. Thank you though for that.
I've got a little one that just started kindergarten, so I'm not sure how it all works. But is there any education for the students themselves on bullying and what to do and what not to do? What to say?
Yes, so that can be really site specific. So the interesting thing about Chula Vista is we are a district where the principals make a lot of the decisions at their school site. And so some of the things are universal, like everybody has PBIS, everybody has social emotional learning, everybody has the protocols that we follow in place for that and restorative practices. But as far as what they show on site regarding bullying, that's something that you want to talk to your principal about. I do know that most principals do, expectation assemblies at least once a quarter. And they go over it depending, in kid-friendly language. So the kinder assembly is going to look different than the 6th grade assembly, for sure, way different. But that would be something you would ask your principal about, is that I'm almost positive it's embedded into their behavior expectation assemblies. Any other questions?
I have a teeny bit more information.
Okay.
Oh, bear with me.
And I have my card, so I have my card. If you want my card, feel free to take it, and I'll be happy to talk about your specific situation. But I'm going to turn it back over to Monique.
So we just talked about victims, right? I didn't talk about the bullies themselves. It's important just to talk about them briefly on behavior so that you can identify if your child is actually the perpetrator. Because sometimes they can be both. Some kids are being bullied by someone and they're the victim and the perpetrator. That can often happen because they lash out to other people. So the behaviors are a little bit similar. I'm going to talk specifically about cyberbullying because that's a little bit harder to identify, but it has to do with using the computers at all hours, having multiple accounts, kind of how I referenced how someone might use different accounts to perpetuate bullying. So you might notice that they have several usernames on the same platform. That could be an indication. They don't want to talk about what they're doing online. Now I know a lot of kids don't want to talk about what they're doing online. So that's not necessarily an indicator. These are just factors to consider. If they're being very secretive about their online behavior, that can be indicative of them being bullied because they're embarrassed, or them being the perpetrator and they know that they shouldn't be doing what they're doing and they don't want you to know. So how can you prevent that? We talk about monitoring it from the perspective of the victim. A lot of parents are uncomfortable monitoring their kids' devices because they say that, there's an expectation of privacy. There isn't. You pay for that device is yours, you've lent it to the child to use, it's yours, you pay the bill. Now if your 5th grader is paying their bill and they have their own cell phone, then okay. But for the most part, that's your device. But instead of being, the technology police, which is what that can feel like, it's important to have those conversations where they feel like they can show it to you. Because the reality is that there are lots of ways to hide your behavior online. She referenced how you can have different apps that look like a calculator. You have 2 calculators on your phone. One of them is not a calculator. One of them is something else. More practically, it's very easy to have multiple social media accounts, the one that the parents know about, and the one that all their friends know about. And that's just a password and a username, so it doesn't require hiding too much, it's rather easy to hide. So it's really important to establish that line of communication between the child and the adult, because if you want to be sneaky, you're going to be sneaky at the end of the day. But these are just suggestions of how to be involved, making sure that everyone has expectations of how to be a good citizen, virtually and in person, and expectations of what happens if you break those rules. So how does this work? There are some families that have literal contracts. I'm a lawyer, so I find it funny, but literally there are different virtual contracts. So I'm allowing you to use this device, and as a result of that, you're going to agree to do X, Y, and Z. If you Google it, there's tons of them online. You don't have to actually write it yourself. You can get a lot of inspiration. The contract, I think, is really just to make sure that you foster that conversation of expectations. So everybody knows the rules on the ground, and it's not like a shock later when, well, I didn't know I couldn't do that kind of thing. Obviously, more behavior online, they copy you, so whatever you're doing has an impact on them as well. So that's prevention. So what are the effects of the bully is a bully? How does this affect them? Being a bully is very detrimental to their own lives. Obviously, they affect the people around them, but it's also affecting them. So one key thing is that in being a bully, they tend to fail to learn how to express their feelings. They're not managing effectively how they're feeling, and they're lashing out at other people. They have higher rates statistically of aggression, violence, and antisocial behavior. Why do you hear about that? Those are precursors to joining us in the criminal justice system. They have lower performance statistically in school, another factor to consider as joining us in the criminal justice system, and higher rates of drug and alcohol use. So what can parents do? Okay, you've decided that my child is the bully. I deduced that. I figured it out. Someone told me, or I figured it out. Well, you've already established family rules about how to navigate social platforms and engaging with other people, and now you have to enforce those rules. You have to make good online conversations. And then obviously on the flip side, enforce positive behavior, whatever that might be. Nice things that they're doing have to be positively enforced. Making sure that they feel like they have a partner in this because they're still really young. And then seeking professional help if necessary. A lot of times they haven't figured out how to express themselves and manage feelings. And so social emotional learning in school is now mandated in the state of California, but it's important, but some kids are still figuring it out. And with COVID, as she indicated, some kids are behind in that. And so you might need to work with them on social emotional skills. Skills like empathy, communication, frustration, teamwork, all those things. What about the bystander? Well, so your kid in general will be a bystander to bullying. It's a matter of how much. And so working with them on expectations of what it means to be just a good person, does that include reporting what happened? Or standing up for the victim? That's not always appropriate. Standing up for the victim in the moment might not be the right thing to do. Maybe the right thing to do in that moment is to go find a trusted adult, a teacher, a coach, someone, and pass on the information about what happened. That might be the right thing, right? You see a fight is happening, and you're not trying to get in the middle of that fight. That's fine. Go get an adult to break up the fight. There are things that can be done along the way. There's some people that call the bystander the upstander, of how can you be a positive impact on the community instead of just a rival. So kids that watch, I talk about this in the very beginning, but kids that are bystanders, what happens often to them is that they feel a lot of the same psychological effects as the victim themselves. Because they might empathize with that victim. The victim sees them as not saying anything and feels like everyone feels this way. And it creates a bigger impact of the bullying. But the bystander themselves is being negatively impacted by the bullying. Also, they're just not the actual victim, like it transfers on them. This is my contact information. Feel free to reach out for any purpose. Like I said, I'm prosecutor at the DA's office. My role is figuring out how to address different issues in the community through programs and policy. I know that I went a little bit over, so I want to be mindful of your time, but do you have any questions for me or comments? No, we do have a school safety task force. So if there is, like an action where you believe that the school is not responding the way they should be as mandated by law, like if they're not subscribing to their mandated reporting obligations, we have a school safety task force that was created, I think, in 2019. So there's a DA who specifically responds to all of those complaints and then works with the school districts and the families sometimes to figure out what it is. Maybe there was miscommunication, or maybe there were violations of the mandated reporting obligations. So that's a different resource we're not for a lot of the things we talked about. But if there are that feeling of the school district isn't responding, sometimes that is the right avenue.
Next to any like severe incident, or is it more towards like that?
No, it's more for like inappropriate sexual behavior on campus or child abuse of some kind, things like that. But we often help with navigating some of those breakdowns of communication. It's not the intention, but we end up navigating the breakdown of communication that might exist for other types of things.
Can we give Monique a round of applause? Thank you so much. I know that this is, again, a topic of interest, and I'm excited that we have 5 more presentations, 2 that Monique will be doing, one around fentanyl, which is the largest? Yes, it is. I don't want to quote the statistic wrong, but it is one of the largest.
Yeah, we've seen a significant increase in the number of overdose deaths since 2019 in the United States. I don't have my notes in front of me, but it's roughly 194 people a day pass away as a result of fentanyl overdose deaths, which is more than any of the other drugs we have. But what's of real significance is that it's the number one cause of death for a population that is the healthiest. So you're the healthiest, you're the prime of your life, basically. That's the number one cause of death, more than car accidents and criminal. But we're unfortunately starting to see overdose deaths of people under the age of 18, specifically children. So if you Google it, you'll see that it's been happening across the country. We're starting to see that here in San Diego.